Okay, so hi guys, back to the reading of Moby Dick. And last time we left at chapter 15, so let's get from chapter 16 now. Chapter 16 The Ship. In bed, we concocted our plans for the morrow, but to my surprise and no small concern, Quickegg now gave me to understand that he had been diligently consulting Yojo, the name of his black hole god, and Yojo had told him 2 or 3 times over and strongly insisted upon it every way that instead of our going together among the whaling fleet in harbor, and in concert selecting our craft, instead of this, I say Yojo earnestly enjoyed that the selection of the ship should rest wholly with me, inasmuch as Yojo proposed befriending us, in order to do so had already pitched upon a vessel which if I left to myself, I, Ishmael, should infallibly light upon for all the world as though it had turned out by chance, and in that vessel I must immediately ship myself, for the present irrespective of cricket. I have forgotten to mention that, in many things, Quickegg placed great confidence in the excellence of Yojo's judgment and surprising forecast of things, and cherished Yojo with considerable esteem as rather as a rather good sort of god, who perhaps meant well enough upon the whole, but in all cases did not succeed in his benevolent designs. Now, this plan of Quickeg's, or rather Yojo's, touching the selection of our craft, I did not like that plan at all. I had not a little relied upon Quickeg's sagacity to point out the whaler best fitted to carry us and our fortune securely. But as all my remonstrances produced no effect upon Quickegg, I was obliged to acquiesce, and accordingly prepared to set about this business with a determined, rushing sort of energy and vigor that should quickly settle that trifling little affair. Next morning early, leaving Quickegg shut up with Yojo in our little bedroom, for it seemed that it was some sort of Lent or Ramadan or day of fasting, humiliation, and the prayer with Quickegg and Yojo that day. How it was I never could find out, for, though I applied myself to it several times, I never could master his liturgies and 39th article, leaving Quickegg then fasting on his pipe, and Yojo warming himself at his sacrificial fire of shavings. I sallied out among the shipping. After much prolonged sauntering and many random inquiries, I learned that there were 3 ships up for 3 years' voyage: the Devil Dam, the Titbit, and the Pequod. Devil Dam I do not know the origin of. Titbit is obvious. Pequod, you will no doubt remember, was the name of a celebrated tribe of Massachusetts Indians, now extinct as the ancient Medes. I peered and pried about the Devil Dam from her, hopped over to the Titbit, and finally, going on board the Pequod, looked around her for a moment, and then decided that this was the very ship for us. You may have seen many quaint craft in your day, for aught I know: square-toed pluggers, mountainous Japanese junks, butterbox galliots, and whatnot. But take my word for it, you never saw such a rare old craft as this same rare old Pequod. She was a ship of the old school, rather small if anything, with an old-fashioned claw-footed look about her, long seasoned and weather-stained in the typhoons and calms of all 4 oceans. Her old hull's complexion was darkened like a French grenadier's who has alike fought in Egypt and Siberia. Her venerable bows looked bearded. Her masts cut somewhere on the coast of Japan, where her original ones were lost overboard in a gale. Her masts stood stiffly up like the spines of the 3 old kings of Cologne. Her ancient decks were worn and wrinkled, like the pilgrim worship flagstone in Canterbury Cathedral where Becket bled. But to all this her old antiquities were added new and marvelous features, pertaining to the wild business that for more than half a century she had followed. Old Captain Pillig, many years her chief mate, before he commanded another vessel of his own, and now retired seaman and was the principal owner of the Pequod, this old Pillig, during the term of his chief mateship, had built upon her original grotesqueness and inlaid it all over with the quaintness both of material and device unmatched by anything except it to be Torquil Hick's carved buckler or bedstead. She was apparelled like any barbaric Ethiopian emperor, his neck heavy with pendants of polished ivory. She was a thing of trophies, a cannibal of craft, tricking herself forth in the chased bones of her enemies. All round, her unpanelled, open bulwarks were garnished like a continuous jaw, with the long, sharp teeth of the sperm whale inserted there for pins to fasten her old hempen tools and tendons to. Those tools ran not through base blocks of landwood, but deftly travelled over sheaves of sea ivory. Scorning a turnstile wheel at her reverend helm, she sported there a tiller, and that tiller was in one mass, curiously carved from the long, narrow lower jaw of her hereditary foe. The helmsman who steered by the tiller in the tempest felt like the Tartar when he holds back his fiery steed by clutching his jaw. A noble craft, but somehow a most melancholy. All noble things are touched with that. Now, when I looked about the quarterdeck for someone having authority in order to propose myself as a candidate for the voyage, at first I saw nobody, but I could not well overlook the strange sort of tent, or rather wingman, pitched a little behind the mainmast. It seemed only temporary erection used in port. It was of a canonical shape, some 10 feet high, consisting of the long, huge slabs of limber black bone taken from the middle and highest part of the jaws of the right whale. Planted with their board ends on the deck, and a circle of these slabs laced together, mutually sloped towards each other, and at the apex united in tufted point, where the loose, hairy fibers waved to and fro like the topknot on some old Potawatomi Sachem said. The triangular opening faced towards the bows of the ship, so that the insider commanded a complete view forward. And half concealed in this queer tenement, I at length found one who by his aspect seemed to have authority, and who, it being noon, and the ship's work suspended, was now enjoying respite from the burden of command. He was seated on an old-fashioned oaken chair, wriggling all over with curious carving, and the bottom of which was formed of a stout interlacing of the same elastic stuff of which the wigwam was constructed. There was nothing so very particular, perhaps, about the appearance of the elderly man I saw. He was brown and brawny, like most old seamen, and heavily rolled up in the blue pilot cloth. Cut in the Quaker style, only there was a fine and almost microscopic network of minutest wrinkles interlacing round his eyes, which must have arisen from his continual sailing in many hard gales and always looking to windward, for this causes the muscles about the eyes to become pursed together. Such eye wrinkles are very effectual in a skull. "Is this the captain of the Pequod?" said I, advancing to the door of the tent. "Supposing it be the captain of the Pequod, what dost thou want of him?" he demanded. "I was thinking of shipping." "Thou wast thou? I see thou art no Nantucketer. Ever been in a stowboat?" "No, sir, I never have." "Dost know nothing at all about whaling, I dare say, eh?" "Nothing, sir, but I have no doubt I shall soon learn. I have been several voyages in the merchant service, and I think that—" "Merchant service be damned! Talk not that lingo to me. Dost see that leg? I'll take that leg away from thy stern, if ever thou talkest of the merchant service to me again." Marchant. It's actually like using the letter A. So marchant service indeed. I suppose now ye feel considerable proud of having served in those marchant ships. But flukes, man, what makes thee want to go whaling, eh? It looks a little suspicious, didn't it, eh? Hast not been a pirate, hast thou? Didst not rob thy last captain? Didst thou? Dost not think of murdering the officers when thou gettest to sea? I protested my innocence of these things. I saw that under the mask of these half-humorous innuendos, this old seaman, as an insulated Quakerish Nantucketer, was full of his insular prejudices and rather distrustful of all aliens, unless they hailed from Cape Cod or the Vineyard. "But what takes thee whaling? I want to know that before I think of shipping you." "Well, sir, I want to see what whaling is. I want to see the world." "Want to see what whaling is, eh? Have you clapped eye on Captain Ahab?" "Who is Captain Ahab, sir?" Aye, I thought so. Captain Ahab is the captain of this ship." "I am mistaken then. I thought I was speaking to the captain himself." "Thou art speaking to Captain Peleg. That's who ye are speaking to, young man. It belongs to me, and the captain built that to see the Pequod fitted out for the voyage, and supplied with all her needs, including crew. We are part owners and agents. But as I was going to say, if thou wantest to know what whaling is, as thou tellest ye do, I can put you in the way of finding it out before you bind yourself to it, past backing out. Clap eye on. Clap eye on Captain Ahab, young man, and thou wilt find that he has only one leg." "What do you mean, sir? Was the other one lost by the whale?" Lost by whale, young man. Come near to me. It was devoured, chewed up, crunched by the monstrosest ferocity that ever chipped a boat. Ah, ah. I was a little alarmed by his energy, perhaps also a little touched at the hearty grief in his concluding exclamation, but said as calmly as I could, "What you say is no doubt true enough, sir, but how could I know there was any particular ferocity in that particular whale, though indeed I might have inferred as much from the simple fact of the accident. Look ye now, young man, thy lungs are soft of soft. Do ye see? Thou dost not talk shark a bit. Sure, you've been to sea before now, sure of that?" "Sir," said I, "I thought I told you that I have been 4 voyages in the merchant." "Hard down out of that. Mind what I said about the merchant service. Don't aggravate me. I won't have it. But let us understand each other. I have given thee a hint about what whaling is. Do ye yet feel inclined for it?" "I do, sir." "Very good. Now art thou the man to pitch a harpoon down a live whale's throat and then jump after it? Answer, quick." "I am, sir, if it should be positively indispensable to do so, not to be got rid of, that is, which I do not take to be the fact." "Good again. Now then, thou not only wantest to go a whaling to find out by experience what whaling is, but you also want to go in order to see the world. Was not that what you said?" "I thought so. Well then, just step forward there and take a peep over the weather bow and then back to me and tell me what you see there." For a moment I stood a little puzzled by this curious request, not knowing exactly how to take it, whether humorously or in earnest, but concentrating all these crowds feet into this one skull, Captain Pillock there started me on the errand. Going forward and glancing over the weather bow, I perceived that the ship swinging to her anchor with the flood tide was now obliquely pointing toward the open ocean. The prospect was unlimited, but exceedingly monotonous and forbidding. Not the slightest variety that I could see. "Well, what's the report?" said Peleg when I came back. "What did ye see?" "Not much," I replied. "Nothing but bar. Considerable horizon, though, and there's a squall coming up, I think." "Well, what dost thou think, then, of seeing the world? Do you wish to go round Cape Horn to see any more of it, eh? Can't you see the world where you stand?" I was a little staggered, but go a whaling I must, and I would. And then Pequod was as good a ship as any, I thought the best, and all this I now repeated to Pillock. "See me so determined," he expressed his willingness to ship me. "And thou mayest as well sign the paper right off," he added. "Come along with you." And so saying, he led the way below deck into the cabin. Seated on the transom was what seemed to me the most uncommon and surprising figure. It turned out to be Captain Bildad, who, along with Captain Pillock, was one of the largest owners of the vessel, the others' shares, as is sometimes the case in these ports, being held by a crowd of old annuitants, widows, fatherless children, and chancery wards, each owning about the value of timberhead or a foot of plank or a nail or two in the ship. People in the Nantucket invest their money in whaling vessels, same way that you do yours in approved state stocks, bringing in good interest. Now, Bildad, like Bilek, and indeed many other Nantucketers, was a Quaker, the island having been originally settled by that sect, and to this day its inhabitants in general retain in an uncommon measure of peculiarities of the Quaker, only variously and anonymously modified by things altogether alien and heterogeneous. For some of these same Quakers are the most sanguinary of all sailors and whale hunters. They are fighting Quakers. They are Quakers with vengeance. So that there are instances among them of men who named with the scripture names, a singularly common fashion on the island, and in childhood naturally imbibing the stately dramatic thee and thou of the Quaker idiom, still from the audacious daring and boundless adventure of their subsequent lives, strangely blend with these unoutgrown peculiarities a thousand bold dashes of characters, not unworthy a Scandinavian sea king or poetical pagan Roman. And when these things unite in a man of greatly superior natural force, with a globular brain and a ponderous heart, who has also, by the stillness and seclusions of many long night watchers in the remotest waters and beneath constellations never seen here at the north, been led to think untraditionally and independently, receiving all nature's sweet or savage impressions fresh from her own virgin, voluntarily and confiding breasts, and thereby chiefly, but with some help from accidental advantages, to learn a bold and nervous lofty language, that man make one in a whole nation's senses, a mighty pageant creature, formed for noble tragedies. Nor will it at all detract from him, dramatically regarded, if either by birth or other circumstances. He have what seems a half-wilful overruling morbidness at the bottom of his nature. For all men tragically great are made so through a certain morbidness. Be sure of this, O young ambitious. All mortal greatness is but disease. But as yet we have not to do with such an one, but with quite another, and still a man, who, if indeed peculiar, it only results again from another phase of the Quaker, modified by individual circumstances. Oh, sorry, that was really hard and long sentences. Like Captain Pillock, Captain Bildad was a well-to-do retired whaleman, but unlike Captain Pillock, who cared not a rush for what are called serious things, and indeed deemed those self-same serious things the veriest of all trifles, Captain Bildad had not only been originally educated according to the strictest sect of Nantucket Quakerism, but all his subsequent ocean life, and the sight of many unclad, lowly island creatures round the Horn, all that had not moved this native-born Quaker one single jot, had not so much as altered one angle of his vest. Still, for all his immutableness, was there some lack of common consistency about worthy Captain Pillock, though refusing, from conscientious scruples to bear arms against land invaders, yet himself had illimitably invaded the Atlantic and Pacific, and though a sworn foe to human bloodshed, yet had he in his straight-blooded coat spilled tons upon tons of Leviathan gore. How now in the contemplative evening of his days the pious Bildad reconciled these things in the reminiscence, I do not know, but it did not seem to concern him much, and very probably he had long since come to the sage and sensible conclusion that man's religion is one thing, and this practical world quite other. One thing, and this practical world quite another. This world pays dividends, rising from a little cabin boy in short clothes of the drabbest drab to harpooner in a broad shad-bellied waistcoat, from that becoming boat-header, chief mate, and captain, and finally a shipowner. Bildad, as I hinted before, had concluded his adventurous career by wholly retiring from active life at the goodly age of 60, and dedicating his remaining days to the quiet receiving of his well-earned income. Now, Bildad, I am sorry to say, had the reputation of being an incorrigible old hunk, and in his sea-going days, a bitter, hard taskmaster. They told me in Nantucket, though it certainly seems a curious story, that when he sailed the old catgut whaleman, his crew, upon arriving home, were mostly all carried ashore to the hospital, sore, exhausted, and worn out. For a pious man, especially for a Quaker, he was certainly rather hard-headed, to say the least. He never used to swear, though, at his men, they said, but somehow he got an inordinate quantity of cruel, unmitigated hard work out of them. When Bildad was a chief mate, to have his drab-colored eye intently looking at you made you feel completely nervous, till you could clutch something, a hammer or markling spike, and go to work like mad at something or other, never mind what. Indolence and idleness perished from before him. His own person was the exact embodiment of his utilitarian character. On his long, gaunt body he carried no spear flesh, no superfluous bird, his chin having a soft economical nap to it, like the worn nap of his broad-brimmed hat. Such then was the person that I saw seated on the transom when I followed Captain Belloc down into the cabin. The space between the decks was small, and there, bolt upright, sat old Bildad, who always sat so, and never leaned, and this to save his coattails. His broad brim was placed beside him. His legs were stiffly crossed, his drab vesture was buttoned up to his chin, and spectacles on nose, he seemed absorbed in reading from ponderous volume. Bildad, cried Captain Belloc. At it again, Bildad, eh? Ye have been studying those scriptures now for the last 30 years, to my certain knowledge. How far you got, Bildad? As if long habituated to such profane talk from his old shipmate, Bildad, without noticing his present irreverence, quietly looked up, seeing me, glanced again inquiringly toward Pillock. He says he's our man, Bildad, said Peleg. He wants to ship. Dost thee, said Bildad, in a hollow tone, and turning round to me. I dost, said I unconsciously. He was so intense, a Quaker. What do you think of him, Bildad, said Peleg. He'll do, said Bildad, eyeing me, and then went on spelling away at his book in a mumbling tone quite audible. I thought him the queerest old Quaker I ever saw, especially as Peleg, his friend, an old shipmate, seemed such a blusterer. But I said nothing, only looking around me sharply. Peleg now drew open a chest, and drawing forth the ship's articles, placed pen and ink before him, and seated himself at the little table. I began to think it was high time to settle with myself at what terms I would be willing to engage for the voyage. I was already aware that in the whaling business they paid no wages, but all hands, including the captain, received certain shares of the profits called leys, and that these leys were proportioned to the degree of importance pertaining to the respective duties of the ship's company. I was also aware that being a green hand at whaling, my own lay would not be very large, but considering that I was used to the sea, could steer a ship, splice a rope, and all that, I made no doubt that from all I had heard I should be offered at least 275th lay, that is, 275th part of the clear net proceeds of the voyage, whatever that might eventually amount to. And though the 275th lay was what they call rather long lay, yet it was better than nothing, and if we had lucky voyage, might pretty nearly pay for the clothing I would wear out on it, not to speak of my 3 years' beef and board, for which I would not have to pay one stiver. It might be thought that this was a poor way to accumulate a princely fortune, and so it was a very poor way indeed. But I am one of those who never take on about princely fortunes, and am quite content if the world is ready to board and lodge me, while I am putting up at this grim sign of the thundercloud. Upon the whole, I thought the 275th lay would be about the fair thing, but would not have been surprised had I been offered 200, considering I was of a broad-shouldered make. But one thing, nevertheless, that made me a little just distrustful about receiving a generous share of the profits was this. Ashore, I had heard something of both Captain Peleg and his unaccountable old crony Bildad, how that they being the principal proprietors of the Pequod, therefore the other and more inconsiderable and scattered owners left nearly the whole management of the ship's affair to these two. And I did not know but what the stingy old Bildad might have mighty a deal to say about shipping hands, especially as I now found him on the board the Pequod, quite at home there in the cabin, and reading his Bible as if at his own fireside. Now while the Peleg was vainly trying to mend the pen with his jackknife, old Bildad, to my no small surprise, considering that he was such an interested party in these proceedings, Bildad never heeded us, but went on mumbling to himself out of his book. Lay not up for yourself treasures upon earth, where knoweth. Well, Captain Bildad, interrupted Peleg, what do you say? What lay shall we give this young man? Thou knowest best, was the sepulchral reply. The 777th wouldn't be too much, would it? Where moth and rust do corrupt, but lay. Lay indeed, thought I, and such a lay. 777th. Well, old Bildad, you are determined that I, for one, shall not lay up many lays here below, where moth and rust do corrupt. It was an exceedingly long lay, that indeed, and thought from the magnitude of the figure it might at first deceive a landsman, yet the slightest consideration will show that though 777 is a pretty large number, yet when you come to make a tenth of it, you will then see, I say, that 777 part of farthing is a good deal less than 777 gold doubloons. And so I thought at the time. Why, bless your eyes, Bildad, cried Billig, thou dost not want to swindle this young man. He must have more than that. 777th again, said Bildad, without lifting his eyes, and then went on mumbling, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. I am going to put him down for the 300th, said Peleg. Do you hear that, Bildad? The 300th lay, I say. Bildad laid down his book, and turning solemnly toward him, said, Captain Peleg, Thou hast a generous heart, but thou must consider the duty thou owest to other owners of this ship, widows and orphans, many of them, and that if we too abundantly reward the labors of these young men, we may be taking the bread from those widows and those orphans. The 777th lay, Captain Peleg. Thou, Bildad, roared Peleg, starting up and clattering about the captain. Blast ye, Captain Bildad. If I had followed thy advice in these matters, I would afore now had a conscience to lug about that would be heavy enough to founder the largest ship that ever sailed round Cape Horn. Captain Peleg, said Bildad steadily, thy conscience may be drawing 10 inches of water on 10 fathoms. I can't tell. But as thou art still an impenitent man, Captain Peleg, I greatly fear lest thy conscience be but a leaky one, and will in the end sink thee foundering down to the fiery pit, Captain Peleg. Fiery pit, you insult me, man. Past all natural bearing, you insult me. It's an all-fired outrage to tell any human creature that he is bound to hell. Flukes and flames, Bildad. Say that again to me and start my soul bolt. But I'll swallow live goat with all his hair and horns on. Out of the cabin, you canting, drab-collared son of wooden gun. Straight wake with you. Fuck. As he thundered out this, he made a rush at Bildad with the marvelous oblique sliding celerity. Bildad for that time eluded him. Alarmed at this terrible outburst between the two principal and responsible owners of the ship, feeling half a mind to give up all idea of sailing in a vessel so questionably owned and temporarily commanded, I stepped aside from the door to give egress to Bildad, who I made no doubt was all eagerness to vanish from before the awakened wrath of Peleg. But to my astonishment, he sat down again in the transom very quietly, and seemed to have not the slightest intention of withdrawing. He seemed quite used to impenitent Peleg and his ways. As for Peleg, after letting off his rage as he had, there seemed no more left in him, and he too sat down like a lamb, though he twitched a little as if still nervously agitated. Phew, he whistled at last. The squale's gone off to leeward, I think, Bildad. Thou used to be good at sharpening a lance. Mend that pen, will you? My jackknife here needs the grindstone. That's he. Thank you. Bildad. Now then, my young man, Ishmael's thy name, didn't you say? Well then, down you go here, Ishmael, for 300 clay. Captain Peleg, said I have a friend with me who wants to ship too. Shall I bring him down tomorrow? To be sure, said Peleg. Fetch him along, and we'll look at him. What lay does he want? Groaned Bildad, glancing up from the book in which he had again been burying himself. Oh, never thee mind about that, Bildad, said Peleg. Has he ever welded any? Turning to me. Killed more whales than I can count, Captain Peleg. Well, bring him along then. And after signing the papers, off I went. Nothing doubting but that I had done a good morning's work, and that the Pequod was the identical ship that Yojo had provided to carry Quicker and me round the Cape. But I had not proceeded far when I began to bethink me that the captain with whom I was to sail yet remained unseen by me, though indeed in many cases a whale ship will be completely fitted out and receive all her crews on board, ere the captain makes himself visible by arriving to take command, for sometimes these voyages are so prolonged and the shore intervals at home so exceedingly brief that if the captain have a family or any absorbing concernment of that sort, he does not trouble himself with much about his ship in port, but leaves her to the owners till all is ready for sea. However, it is always as well to have a look at him before irrevocably committing yourself into his hand. Turning back, I accosted Captain Peleg, inquiring where Captain Ahab was to be found. And what dost thou want of Captain Ahab? It's all right enough, thou art shipped. Yes, but I should like to see him. But I don't think thou wilt be able to at present. I don't know exactly what's the matter with him, but he keeps close inside the house, a sort of sick, and yet he don't look so. In fact, he ain't sick, but no, he isn't well either. Anyhow, young man, he won't always see me, so I don't suppose he will see. He's a queer man, Captain Ahab, so some think, but a good one. Oh, thou'lt like him well enough, no fear, no fear. He's a grand, ungodly, godlike man. Captain Ahab doesn't speak much, but when he does speak, Then you may well listen. Mark ye to be forewarned, Ahab's above the common. Ahab's been in colleges, as well as among the cannibals, been used to deeper wonders than the waves, fix his fiery lance in a mightier, stranger foes than whales. His lance, aye, the keenest and surest that out of all our isle. Oh, he ain't Captain Bildad, no, and he ain't Captain Pillig. He's Ahab, boy, and Ahab of old, thou knowest, was a crowned king, and a very vile one. When that wicked king was slain, the dogs, they did not lick his boot. Come hither to me, hither, hither, said Pillig, with a significance in his eyes that almost startled me. Look ye, lad, never say that on board the Pequod. Never say it anywhere. Captain Ahab did not name himself. 'Twas a foolish, ignorant whim of his crazy widowed mother, who died when he was only 12 months old. And yet the old Scotistic at Gayhead said that the name would somehow prove prophetic. And perhaps other fools like her may tell thee the same. I wish to warn thee, it's a lie. I know Captain Ahab well. I've sailed with him as mate years ago. I know what he is, a good man, not a pious, good man, like Bildad, but swearing a good man. Something like me, only there's a good deal more of him. Aye, aye. I know that he was never very jolly, and I know that on the passage home he was a little out of his mind for a spell, but it was the sharp shooting pains in his bleeding stump that brought that about, as anyone might see. I know too that ever since he lost his leg last voyage by that accused whale, he's been kind of moody, desperate moody, and savage sometimes, but that will all pass off, and once for all, let me tell thee and assure thee, young man, it's better to sail with a moody good captain than laughing bad one. So goodbye to thee, and wrong not Captain Ahab, because he happens to have a wicked name. Besides, my boy, he has a wife, not 3 voyages wedded, sweet, resigned girl. Think of that. By that sweet girl that old man had a child. Hold ye then there can be any utter hopeless harm in Ahab? No, no, my lad. Stricken, blasted, if he be, Ahab has my humanities. Ahab has his humanities. As I walked away, I was full of thoughtfulness. What had been incidentally revealed to me of Captain Ahab filled me with certain wild vagueness of painfulness concerning him, and somehow, at the time, I felt sympathy and sorrow for him, but for I don't know what, unless it was the cruel loss of his leg. And yet I also felt strange awe of him, that sort of awe which I cannot at all describe, but in not exactly awe. I do not know what it was, but I felt it, and it did not disincline me towards him, though I felt impatience at what seemed like a mystery in him, so imperfectly as he was known to me then. However, my thoughts were at length carried in other directions, for the present dark Ahab slipped my mind. Chapter 17. Wow, okay. The Ramadan. As Quiqueg's Ramadan, or fasting, or humiliation, was to continue all day, I did not choose to disturb him till towards nightfall, for I cherished the greatest respect towards everybody's religious obligations, never mind how comical, and could not find it in my heart to undervalue even a congregation of ants worshipping a toadstool, or those other creatures in certain part of our earth who, with a degree of footmanism quite unprecedented in the other planets, bow down before the torso of a deceased land proprietors merely on account of the inordinate possessions he had owned and rented in his name. I say, we good Presbyterian Christians should be charitable in these things, and not fancy ourselves so vastly superior to other mortals, pagans and what not, because of their half-crazy conceits on these subjects. There is Quiqueg now, certainly entertaining the most absurd notions about Yojo and his Ramadan. But what of that? Quiqueg thought that he knew what he was about, I suppose. He seemed to be content, and there let him rest. All our arguing with him would not avail. Let him be, I say, and heaven have mercy on us all, Presbyterians and pagans alike, for we are all somehow dreadfully cracked about the head and sadly need mending. Towards an evening, when I felt assured that all his performances and rituals must be over, I went up to his room and knocked at the door, but no answer. I tried to open it, but it was fastened inside. Quiqueg, said I softly through the keyhole, all silent. I said, Quiqueg, why don't you speak? It's Ishmael. But all remained still as before. I began to grow alarmed. I had allowed him such abundant time, I thought he might have had an apoplectic fit. I looked through the keyhole, but the door opening into an odd corner of the room, the keyhole prospect was built but crooked and sinister one. I could not see part of the footboard of the bed and linen of the wall, but nothing more. I was surprised to behold, resting against the wall, the wooden shaft of Quickeg's harpoon, which the landlady the evening previous had taken from him before our mount into the chamber. That's strange, thought I, but at any rate, since the harpoon stands yonder, and he seldom or never goes aboard without it, therefore he must be inside here, and no possible mistake. Quick, quick, all still. Something must have happened. Apoplexy. I tried to burst open the door, but it stubbornly resisted. Running downstairs, I quickly stated my suspicions to the first person I met, the chambermaid. La la, she cried. I thought something must be the matter. I went to make the bed after breakfast and the door was locked. And not a mouse to be heard, and it's been just so silent ever since. But I thought maybe you had both gone off and locked your baggage in for safekeeping. La la, ma'am, mistress. Murder, Mrs. Hussey, apoplexy. And with these cries she ran toward the kitchen, I following. Mrs. Huxley soon appeared, with the mustard pot in one hand and the vinegar cruet in the other, having just broken away from the occupation of attending to the castors, and scolding her little black boy meantime. Woodhouse, cried I, which way to it? Run for God's sake and fetch something to pry open the door. The axe, the axe. He's had the stroke, depend upon it. And so saying, I was unmethodically rushing upstairs again empty-handed, when Mrs. Hussey interposed the mustard pot and vinegar cruet an entire castor of her countenance. What's the matter with you, young man? Get the axe, for God's sake, run for the doctor, someone, while I pry it open. Look here, said the landlady, quickly putting down the vinegar cruet, so as to have one hand free. Look here, are you talking about prying open any of my doors? And with that she seized my arm. What's the matter with you? What's the matter with you, shipmate? In as calm but rapid a manner as possible, I gave her to understand the whole case. Unconsciously clapping the vinegar cruet to one side of her nose, she ruminated for an instant, then exclaimed, No, I haven't seen it since I put it there. Running to a little closet under the landing of the stairs, she glanced in and, returning, told me that Quickeg's harpoon was missing. He's killed himself, she cried. It's unfortunate, Sticks done over again. There goes another counterpane. God pity his poor mother. It'll be the ruins of my house. Has the poor lad a sister? Where's that girl? There, Betty. Go to Snarls, the painter, and tell him to paint me a sign, with no suicides permitted here, and no smoking in the parlor. Might as well kill both birds at once. Kill? The Lord be merciful to his ghost. What's that noise there? You, young man, was there? And running after me, she caught me as I was again trying to force open the door. I won't allow it. I won't have my premises spoiled. Go for the locksmith. There's one about a mile from here, but avast, putting her hand in her side pocket. Here's a key that'll fit, I guess. Let's see. And with that, she turned it in the lock, but alas, Quickeg's supplemental bolt remained unwithdrawn within. Have to burst it open, said I, and was running down the entry little for a good start, when the landlady caught me, again vowing I should not break down her premises, but I tore from her with a sudden bodily rush, dashed myself full against the mark. With a prodigious noise, the door flew open, and the knob slamming against the wall sent the plaster to the ceiling, and there, good heavens, there sat Quickeg, altogether cool and self-collected, right in the middle of the room, squatting on his hams, holding Yojo on top of his head. He looked neither one way nor the other way, but sat like a carved image with scarce a sign of active life. Quickeg, said I, going up to him. Quickeg, what's the matter with you? He ain't been sitting so all day, has he, said landlady, but all we said, not a word could we drag out of him. I almost felt like pushing him over, so as to change his position, for it was almost intolerable. It seemed so painfully and unnaturally constrained, especially as in all probability he had been sitting so for upwards of 8 or 10 hours, going through without his regular meals. Mrs. Hussery, said I, he's alive at all events, so leave us, if you please, and I will see to this strange affair myself. Closing the door upon the landlady, I endeavoured to prevail upon Quickeg to take a chair, but in vain. There he sat, and all he could do, for all my polite arts and blandishments, he would not move a peg, nor say a single word, not even look at me, nor notice my presence in the slightest way. I wondered, thought I, if this can possibly be part of his Ramadan. Do they fast on their hams that way in his native island? If must be so, yes, it's part of his creed. I suppose, well, then let him rest. He'll get up sooner or later, no doubt. It can't last forever, thank God, and his Ramadan only comes once a year, and I don't believe it's a very punctual then. I went down to supper, after sitting a long time listening to the long stories of some sailors who had just come from the plum pudding voyage, as they called it, that is, a short whaling voyage in a schooner or brig confined to the north of the line in the Atlantic Ocean only. After listening to these puddingers till nearly 11 o'clock, I went upstairs to go to bed, feeling quite sure by this time Kukek must certainly have brought his Ramadan to termination. But no, there he was just where I had left him. He had not stirred an inch. I began to grow vexed with him. It seemed so downright senseless and insane to be sitting there all day and half the night on his hams in a cold room, holding a piece of wood on his head. For heaven's sake, Cricket, get up and shake yourself. Get up and have some supper. You will starve. You will kill yourself, Cricket. But not a word did he reply. Despairing of him, therefore, I determined to go to bed and to sleep, and no doubt before a great while he would follow me. But previous to turning in, I took my heavy bearskin jacket and drew it over him, as it promised to be a very cold night, and he had nothing but his ordinary round jacket on. For some time, do all I would, I could not get into faintest doze. I had blown out the candle, and the mere thought of Kukek, not 4 feet off, sitting there in that uneasy position, stark alone in the cold and dark, this made me really wretched. Think of it, sleeping all night in the same room with the wide-awake pagan on his hams in this dreary, unaccountable Ramadan. But somehow I dropped off at last, and knew nothing more till the break of day, when, looking over the bedside, there squatted Queequeg, as if he had been screwed down to the floor. But as soon as the first glimpse of sun entered the window, up he got, with stuff and grating joints, but with a cheerful look, limped towards me where I lay, pressed his forehead against mine, and said, "His Ramadan is over." Now, as I before hinted, I have no objection to any person's religion, be it what it may, so long as that person does not kill or insult any other person, because that other person don't believe it also. But when man's religion becomes really frantic, when it is a positive torment to him, and in fine makes this earth of ours an uncomfortable inn to lodge in, then I think it high time to take that individual side and argue the point with him. And just so I now did with Queequeg. "Queequeg," said I, "get into bed now and lie and listen to me." I then went on, beginning with the rise and progress of the primitive religions, and coming down to the various religions of the present time, during which time I labored to show Queequeg that all these Lents, Ramadans, and prolonged ham squattings in cold, cheerless rooms were stark nonsense, bad for the health, useless for the soul, opposed, in short, to the obvious laws of hygiene and common sense. I told him, too, that he being in other things such an extremely sensible and sagacious savage, it pained me, very badly pained me, to see him now so deplorably foolish about his ridiculous Ramadan of his. Besides, argued I, fasting makes the body cave in, hence the spirit caves in, and all thoughts born of fast must necessarily be half-starved. This is the reason why most dyspeptic religionists cherish such a melancholy notions about their hereafters. In other words, Queequeg, said I, rather digressively, hell is an idea first born in the undigested apple dumpling, and since then perpetuated through their hereditary dyspepsias nurtured by Ramadans. I then asked Queequeg whether he himself was ever troubled with dyspepsia, expressing the idea very plainly so that he could take it in. He said no, only upon one memorable occasion. It was after a great feast given by his father the king, on the gaining of a great battle wherein 50 of the enemy had been killed by about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and all cooked and eaten that very evening. "No more, Queequeg," said I, shuddering. "That will do," for I knew the inference without his further hinting them. I had seen a sailor who had visited that very island, and he told me that it was the custom, when a great battle had been gained there, to barbecue all the slain in the yard or garden of the victor, and then, one by one, they were placed in a great wooden trenches and garnished around like a pilau with the breadfruit and coconuts and with some parsley in their mouths. Were were sent round with the victor's compliments to all his friends, just as though these presents were so many Christmas turkeys. After all, I do not think that my remarks about religion made much impression upon Cricket, because, in the first place, he somehow seemed dull of hearing on that important subject, unless considered from his own point of view, and in the second place, he did not more than one third understand me, couch my ideas simply as I could, and finally, he no doubt thought he knew a good deal more about the true religion than I did. He looked at me with a sort of condescending concern and compassion, as though he thought it a great pity that such sensible young men should be so hopelessly lost to evangelical pagan piety. At last we rose and dressed, and Quickegg, taking prodigious hearty breakfast of chowders of all sorts, so that the landlady should not make such profit by reason of his Ramadan, we sallied out to board the Pequod, sauntering along and picking our teeth with the halibut bones. Chapter 18. His Mark. As we were walking down the end of the wharf toward ship, Quickegg carrying his harpoon, Captain Pillig in his gruff voice loudly hailed us from his wigman, saying he had not suspected my friend was a cannibal, and furthermore announcing that he let no cannibals on board that craft unless they previously produced their papers. What do you mean by that, Captain Pillig? Said I, now jumping on the bulwarks and leaving my comrade standing on the wharf. I mean, he replied, he must show his papers. Yes, said Captain Bildad on his hollow voice, sticking his head from behind Pillig's out of the wigwam. He must show that he is converted. Son of darkness, he added, turning to Quickegg. Art thou at present in communion with any Christian church? Why, said I, he is a member of a First Congregational Church. Here, be it said, that many tattooed savages sailing in Nantucket ship at last come to be converted into the churches. First Congregational Church, cried Bildad. What? That worships in Deacon Deuteronomy Coleman's meeting house? And so saying, taking out his spectacles, he rubbed them with his great yellow bandana handkerchief, and putting them on very carefully, came out of the wigwam, and leaning stiffly over the bulwarks, took a good long look at Quickett. How long had he been a member? He then said, turning to me. Not very long, I rather guess, young man. No, said Pilleg, and he hasn't been baptized right either, or it would have washed some of the devil's blue off his face. Do tell now, cried Bildad. Is this Philistine a regular member of Deacon Deuteronomy's meeting? I never saw him going there, and I pass it every Lord's Day. I don't know anything about Deacon Deuteronomy or his meetings, said I. All I know is that Quickegg here is a born member of the First Congregational Church. He is a deacon himself, Quickegg is. Young man, said Bildad sternly, thou art skylarking with me. Explain thyself. Thou young Hittite, what church does thee mean? Answer me. Finding myself thus hard pushed, I replied, I mean, sir, the same ancient Catholic church to which you and I and Captain Pillig there and Quickegg here and all of us and every mother's son and soul of us belong, the great and everlasting first congregation of this whole worshipping world. We all belong to that, only some of us cherish some crotchets, no ways touching the grand belief. In that we all join hands. Splice, thou meanst. Splice hands, cried Pilleg, drawing nearer. Young man, you'd better ship for a missionary instead of for a man's hand. I never heard a better sermon. Deacon Deuteronomy, why Father Maple himself couldn't beat it, and he's reckoned something. Come aboard, never mind about papers. I say, tell Quahog, there, what's that you call him? Tell Quahog to step along by the great anchor. What a harpoon he's got there. Looks like good stuff, that, and he answered about right. I say, Quahog, or whatever your name is, did you ever stand in the head of the whale boat? Did you ever strike a fish? Without saying a word, Quickegg, in his wild sort of way, jumped upon the bulwark, from thence up into the bows of one of whale boats hanging to the side, and then bracing his left knee and poising his harpoon, cried out in some such way as this. Captain, you see him small drop tar on water there? You see him? Well, suppose him one whale eye. Well then, and taking sharp aim at it, he darted the iron right over old Bildad's broad brim, clean across the ship's decks, and struck the glistening tar spout out of sight. Now, said Queequeg, quietly hauling in the line. S'pose see him whaley eye? Why, that whaley did. Quick, Bildad, said Billig, his partner, who, aghast at the close vicinity of the flying harpoon, has retreated towards the cabin gangway. Quick, I say you, Bildad, and get the ship's papers. We must have hedgehog there, quahog, in one of our boats. Look ye, quahog, we'll give you the 19th lay, and that's more than ever was given a harpooner yet out of Nantucket. So down we went into the cabin, and to my great joy, Queequeg was soon enrolled among the same ship's company to which I myself belonged. When all preliminaries were over and Pilleg had got everything ready for signing, he turned to me and said, I guess Quahog there don't know how to write, does he? I said, Quahog, blast ye, dost thou sign thy name or make thy mark? But at this question, Queequeg, who had twice or thrice before taken part in similar ceremonies, looked no way abashed, but taking the offered pen, copied upon the paper in a proper place an exact counterpart of queer round figure which was tattooed upon his arm, so that through Captain Pilleg's obstinate mistake touching his appellative, it stood something like this: Quahog, his mark. Meanwhile, Captain Bildad sat earnestly and steadfastly eyeing Queequeg, and at last, rising solemnly and fumbling in the huge pockets of his broad-skirted drab coat, took out a handle of tracts, selecting one entitled The Latter Day Coming, or No Time to Lose, placed it in Queequeg's hands, and then grasping them and the book with both his, looked earnestly into his eyes, and said, Son of darkness, I must do my duty by thee. I am part owner of this ship, and feel concerned for the soul of all its crew. If thou still clingest to thy pagan ways, which I sadly fear, I beseech thee, remain not for aye a Belial bondsman. Spurn the idle bell, and the hideous dragon, turn from the wrath to come. Mind thine eye, I say, oh goodness gracious, steer clear of that fiery pit. Something of the salt sea yet lingered in old Bildad's language, heterogeneously mixed with scriptural and domestic phrases. Avast there, Bildad, avast now spoiling our harpooner, cried Pilleg. Pious harpooners never make good voyagers. It takes the shark out of them. No harpooner is worth the voyager. No harpooner is worth a straw who ain't pretty sharkish. There was a young Ned Swain, once the bravest boat-header out of all Nantucket and the Vineyard. He joined the meeting and never came too good. He got so frightened about his plaguey soul that he shrinked and sheered away from the whales for fear of afterclaps in case he got stow and went to Davy Jones. Pilleg, said Bildad, lifting his eyes and hands, thou thyself, as I myself, hast seen many a perilous time. Thou knowest, Pilleg, what it is to have the fear of death. How, then, canst thou prate in this ungodly guise? Thou belliest thine own heart, Pilleg. Tell me, when this same Pequod here had her 3 masts overboard in that typhoon on Japan, that same voyage when thou went mate with Captain Ahab, didst thou not think of death and the judgment then? Hear him now, cried Pilleg, marching along the cabin and thrusting his hand far down into his pocket. Hear him, all of you. Think of that. When every moment we thought the ship would sink. Death and judgment then? What? With all 3 masts making such an everlasting thundering against the side, and every sea breaking over us, fore and aft. Think of death and the judgment then? No time to think about that time. Life was what Captain Ahab and I was thinking of, and have to save all hands, have to rig jury masts, have to get into the nearest port. That was what I was thinking of. Bildad said no more, but buttoning up his coat, stalked on deck, where we followed him. There he stood, very quietly overlooking some sailmakers who were mending the topsail in the west. Now and then he stooped to pick up a patch, or save an end of the tower of twine, which otherwise might have been wasted. Oh, that was hard to read, maybe because I haven't read, or it's just the old language, man. The old languages are hard to read, I guess. Alright, thank you. I will continue with chapter 19 later on, so see you all until then. Bye bye.